These are some end of session reminders for the 2025 legislative session. First is, how many times can a bill be reconsidered? The same rule applies whether a bill is in committee or on the floors of the Assembly and the Senate. Only one reconsideration is in order. The first time a bill fails, it can be granted reconsideration. However, if it fails a second time, that's it. There is not a second reconsideration. And as a result, the bill has failed passage if it fails a second time after having been reconsidered. How many times can a bill be placed on call? There is no rule on this. In other words, the joint rules, Senate rules, and Assembly rules do not cover the number of times a bill can be placed on call, whether in committee or on the floor. The question is also not covered in Mason's manual. And neither house has a formal custom or practice that sets forth the maximum number of times a bill can be placed on call. 72-hour in print rule. A bill cannot be passed or become a statute unless that bill and any amendments have been in print and published on the internet for at least 72 hours before the vote, unless the governor has submitted a statement that it's needed to address a state of emergency. Consent calendars. There are different rules between the Senate and Assembly regarding what is a measure for the consent calendar on their floors. For example, Senate Rule 28.3A says if a Senate bill or a Senate bill is amended in the Senate to create a new bill or to rewrite the bill, a standing committee may not place the bill on its consent calendar. Also note that there's a special consent calendar on the Senate floor, and on rare occasion, there is batching of bills on the Assembly floor. Inactive file. Bills taken off the Senate inactive file are returned to the second reading file and therefore eligible on the second day. In the Assembly, bills that were previously on third reading that were moved to the inactive file are subject to a 1 calendar day notice, but those bills are returned to the third reading file. Policy committee meetings during the last 2 weeks of session. With a rule waiver, committees can meet during that time period. Under Senate Rule 29.10 and Assembly Rule 77.2, dealing with bills that have been substantially amended, and when they're coming back, they have to go to a policy committee hearing. Those policy committee hearings on concurrence bills are not subject to that 2-week prohibition. Double jointing versus contingent enactment amendments. There's a clear difference between the two. Contingent enactment means there's a section in a bill indicating that the bill is to become operative only upon the enactment of another measure or subsequent action. Double jointing amendments are amendments to a bill providing that the amended bill does not override the provision of another bill or both bills propose to amend the same code section of law. Double jointing amendments are used to prevent the problem of chaptering out. Floor amendments. There are limitations to making floor amendments in both houses. For example, under Assembly Rule 69, a motion to amend on the floor is not in order in the last 7 days before the interim or final recess unless there's a 2/3 vote suspension. Now, this rule does not apply to adding or deleting an urgency clause or adopting double jointing amendments. Concur or non-concur voting. Under Joint Rule 26.5, a motion to concur or not concur is not in order until the Legislative Council's digest has appeared in the daily file. However, a motion is in order even if the digest has yet to be printed, as long as an analysis of the bill has been prepared and distributed to the members on the floors. Floor analyses distinction. The Senate floor analyses list support and opposition positions, but the Assembly does not list any on their floor analyses. Vote changes. The Assembly allows its members to add or change votes after the vote has been announced, so long as the final vote is not impacted. The Senate does not allow this except for 2 individuals, the President pro tempore and the Republican leader, as long as the final outcome of a bill is not affected. See Senate Rule 44. Parliamentary inquiry versus point of personal privilege. A parliamentary inquiry is a procedural question posed to the presiding officer by a legislator during a committee hearing or a floor session. On the other hand, a point of personal privilege is an assertion by a member that his or her rights, reputation, or conduct has been impugned, entitling them to quote unquote repudiate the allegation. Adjournment motions. In the legislature, an adjournment motion is not in order if a bill is still on call. Look at Senate Rule 42. Now, once the call is lifted, then a motion to adjourn is in order. Budget trailer bills, they can pretty much be enacted anytime after the budget bill has passed, as long as there's a nominal appropriation and that bill is tied by language to the budget bill, and the trailer bill is listed in the budget bill by number. And these bills are done by majority vote. Pass on file versus pass and retain. A bill author may choose to pass on file, which gives up their opportunity to take up a measure on the floor. In the assembly, pass and retain precludes the author from taking up the bill for that legislative day. The Senate, however, does not recognize a difference between these two. And then letters to the Daily Journal, generally used to express legislative intent or to clarify or explain a bill, is published in the Journal of the bill's House of Origin. The letters are signed by the bill author and usually require approval of the majority and minority leaders in both houses. If there are objections, a letter can be printed by a majority vote like any other motion being made on the floors of the Assembly or Senate.